The rhythm of healing, the octaves method. O is for observation, through stillness we find meditation and breath work that quiet the mind. In silence we listen, the answers are clear, awareness emerges, dissolving the fear. C is for compassion, for self and for all, embracing the good, the struggles, the fall. With kindness we grow, we nurture, we mend, learning to love ourselves as we extend. T is for therapy, a path we explore. Daily we practice unlocking the door. From journaling to mindfulness, healing begins. Each step is a victory as peace settles in. A is for animals and laughter so bright, like children at a play, their joy taking flight. With playfulness and movement, we rediscover the way to heal through the fun that we often delay. V is for victuals, nourishing and pure, detoxifying the body and keeping us sure. We choose what we eat with intention and grace, fueling our journey at our own pace. E is for exercise, where movement is free. We stretch and we bend in sweet harmony. Flexibility grows with choices we make. In strength and in stillness, our bodies awake. S is for socialize, where self-growth begins. Others reflect our triggers and the places within. Through relationships, our true selves we find, growing and healing with each tie that binds. The octaves method, where all behavior makes sense. We just need to find the sense it presents. We just need to find the sense it presents. We just need to find the sense it presents.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 5 of the Trauma and Social Work Podcast. I am KJ Alexander here with my co-host, Tonya Octave, and today we have a lot of important information to dive into. But before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and let Tonya tell a little bit more about herself and what this podcast is about.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tonya Octave, and we are going into Season 5 of Trauma and Social Work Podcast, where we will be discussing and diving deep into my book called Heal the Mind, 7 Strategies Towards Mental Wellness, Happiness, and Success, Exploring Trauma, Mental Wellness, and Ways to Live a More Balanced Life. And before we begin, just a simple reminder that this podcast is for informational purposes only. It is not intended for medical, psychological, mental health, or legal advice. Although I'm a licensed professional, this is not a formal type of treatment. We may talk about things like hypnosis and meditation and things that we would do in a therapeutic, from a therapeutic perspective, but it's not a form of treatment. For individual questions about your wellness, your happiness, and your success, please seek out a professional. And if you are experiencing a mental health crisis, do call 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.
Great, awesome. That was amazing. So with that being said, I want to make sure I tell the audience, if you haven't already, follow this page on Spotify, YouTube, and any other platforms we post episodes on. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any upcoming episodes in the future. And with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Trauma and Social Work Podcast. My name is KJ Alexander, and I'm joined again with Tonya Octave to discuss the book, Heal Thy Mind. And here in our Trauma and Social Work series, we have a lot of great information to dive into. Before we get started, if you haven't already, hit that like button and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos coming up. So for this episode, we wanted to dive into spiritualism and religion as it pertains to mental health and mental wellness. So, for this section in the book, I'm going to go ahead and start out by reading a paragraph from this section. So, it begins like this: meditative practices combined with practicing spiritualism and religion can enhance your wellness. Spiritualism and religion are socio-cultural systems that support society, providing a set of practices, morals, beliefs, and worldview perceptions. There are many practices worldwide, including ancient Egyptian and Indian beliefs, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Islam, Catholicism, Christianity, and hundreds more. Regardless of your thoughts, the common theme is God, a higher entity. To attain mental balance, one must choose a spiritual path that promotes mental peace, mental calmness, and mental discipline. And after reading that, I couldn't agree more. I like how you definitely broke it down into different areas of spirituality and religion, not just relying on one or two. So, with that being said, I wondered if you can kind of give some information on, in your personal experience when working with clients from different backgrounds and diverse religious and spiritual backgrounds, what strategies do you personally use as a mental health professional to respect and incorporate the client's personal spiritual beliefs?
Well, I definitely take into consideration this idea that things can be multicultural. So even like my business, it's multicultural services, which doesn't necessarily explain things, but it sets a foundation of what this practice is all about. And when you look at other cultures from around the world, they have a wealth of knowledge and a richness about them. And within that richness are these other things that you can learn about in terms of how other people develop, come into experience their connection with God. And some of that is through religion, like I kind of talked about in this organized way. And some of it is through spiritual practices and rituals and things like that. And for me, I don't have a judgment about someone else's practice. I have an appreciation about it. And I may use ideas or philosophical concepts that are helpful in my own understanding and connection with God. And so when you ask that question in terms of a clinician, I think it's important to be culturally competent. And so there are culturally competent evidence-based practices out there, but what they're failing to do is add in this spiritual or religious aspect with some sensitivity to it. So, for example, if I were to do a workshop and I wanted to talk about some of the major religions like Christianity and Islam, and then maybe I added Buddhism or Taoism in there, in the actual structure of the workshop, am I also considering the religious practices during my break times? So, am I giving 3 breaks that are consistent with people who will go into a spiritual practice at particular times, like a morning, noon, afternoon practice? So those things are not considered when you're talking about cultural competency. They're not really adding in the spiritual and religious practices. So that's one thing. Another thing that I find, and I've seen this more so post COVID with the development of all of these online programs and having access to places in maybe different parts of the world, I don't see a lot of people of color. And I believe that people of color are just as educated, are just as informed, and have a lot of wealth to say. And so when you are selecting people to be on panels and things like that, I do think that there should be some consideration from to add that diversity, because that diversity is going to give you another perspective. It's going to give you another worldview. Um, and also an appreciation for rituals and practices. So, like, even if I were to ask you in terms of, and you don't necessarily need to disclose, like, if you have religious or spiritual beliefs, but is there a ritual or practice that you have found that brings you closer to God, the creator, whatever name that you're kind of choosing to practice?
Yeah, sure. So I would say for me personally, I believe in prayer. I know that's something that's common in most religious practices, but I don't necessarily believe there's a formal or informal way to do it. It's just kind of to each his own. Whether you want to have a verbal conversation out loud or you just want to kind of talk internally. But I believe that would be the one thing I do the most is just my version of what we call prayer, and I believe there's some benefits to that as well.
So I see that among young people, probably about under their 30s. For men, I see that they go to prayer a lot, and it's not about a formal practice. And they describe it to me in terms of this is my relationship with God. So I talk to God. I do encourage those conversations, however they manifest, to not be in moments of crisis. Because when you need something and you're going to your let's say you need something and you're going to your mom when you need things. If you only go to your mom when you need things, eventually your mom is going to start seeing that pattern and feel some way. But if you go to your mom consistently when you need things and when you don't need things, they're going to feel more of the depth of that relationship. And really, the relationship with God is an internal relationship. So it's you having that internal relationship that I'm doing it because it is reciprocal. I'm giving and receiving. I'm giving love to God and I am receiving love from God. Um, the one thing though that I also notice about young girls under 30, and I say young, but I mean really they're adults. So like women 30 and younger is this the new moon rituals and wanting to do like rituals where they put their maybe their intentions and they put it in water or they're burning it through fire. So I'm hearing a lot of more ritual practices, but more so like with females. Do you kind of notice that with maybe women 30 and under?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that um, certain rituals and practices have resurfaced. Definitely become more popularized thanks to movies, internet, social media, things like that. But I think everything we do has to be based with the right intent because if you just kind of go through the motions in a selfish way, expecting a specific result, that may not be the right intention to get what you want. So if you approach things more open mindedly with less of a selfish intent, maybe more of a selfless intent, then I feel like that's the energy that actually makes things happen more times than not.
So let's say like the intention is wealth. When I say that, that means something different to me. My intention is wealth. When you say that, that may mean something different. And when someone else says that, that might mean I want fancy cars. I want to be able to buy big houses. I want extravagant things. Um, so, really, it is kind of like my understanding of what wealth is. Although, if someone from the outside saw that, they may have judgment about it. Is that kind of like what you're
Yeah.
saying in terms of the internal and really what your purpose is that you're trying to create?
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to be careful with what you ask for because a lot of times the language may be kind of vague. So a person could say, I want to be wealthy, but what does wealth mean to you? Does it mean monetary? It can mean a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of wisdom. So you really have to be specific with what you're asking for. And I think the more specific and the more direct you are with your asking for, that's how you get more positive results, in my opinion.
Okay. Okay. I also find it kind of interesting in reflection of this conversation. How does it change as we age? when we're younger, do we have a different relationship with God? And as we go on the journey of life, how does that relationship change? Is it supposed to change? Are there feelings about it? Because sometimes people will go in and out of their belief with God, especially if something tragic happens. So you may be born and you feel like you're close to God, and something bad happens, and extremely traumatic, and you question God and you say, if there's a God, why would God be doing this to me? I was a child and I was innocent. And so you have to, and then maybe you go through life feeling some way about that and having thoughts about that. If someone is struggling in that way, what do you think is a way to reframe it for that individual?
Yeah, well, I think it's all part of the process, and in those instances, I think it would be important to try to find something that you actually are grateful for and thankful for, because most situations are not all bad 100%.
Mhm.
So if there's some aspect about your life you wish you could change or you wish was different, then more than likely you have the power to change it if you just focus on what exactly the problem issue is and create an action plan so where you actually take steps. It may be over time, maybe a long period of time, but you actually create those action steps to actually fix the problem. And that way you're empowering yourself and not relying on outside forces to empower you.
So you're trying to kind of go in with that internalization of how do you kind of figure out what that experience is. It makes me think of my time when I worked in human trafficking for many, many years. And in that time, I heard some of the most traumatizing stories that were happening to kids, particularly girls, but boys too, over their developmental stages for many, many years. And it was just so much trauma and trauma. So as an adult, I can see why there would be a question. In my work with them, I would talk to them about, okay, so you had the experience. What are you learning about yourself through your experience? Maybe you learned how to speak up for yourself. Maybe you learned great negotiation and sales skills, right? Like maybe you learned how to be independent early on because there was no safe adult for you to, and it pushed you in a direction. Now, you could take that and say, well, I can't be successful. I'm going to constantly struggle with symptoms associated with trauma. I'm going to always be depressed because I um, feel some way about my past experience. Or you could use that experience to say, okay, so now you gave me a challenge and I've developed some skills because I did survive through the challenge. And now, how can I change that and rewrite my story so that those skills can now be used to benefit me so that I can profit off of it, not someone else? Because that's another form of, trafficking, when people use other people's stories, but so that I can feel empowered and take ownership of my story, and share it if I choose, or not share it if I choose, but that I have total freedom of that. Um, but it also may also, I think, as you grow through that process and you start to see that some of your childhood experiences, although the experience may be traumatic, that there was growth. So then I come back, once we're at that stage in psychotherapy, then I'll come back and I'll say, oh, so then it wasn't suffering because it pushed you in a direction that you needed to go in to repair some things for you. And I believe in reincarnation. So sometimes I may say, if my client does as well, I may say to push you to resolve some things from that you needed to resolve from prior lives. But it also could be to resolve things that you need to resolve from this life. It's also to stop generational patterns. And if you heal yourself, you can heal 7 generations before you and 7 generations prior to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think it's an easy process. I want our audience to understand that this is definitely something that you have to be patient with and it takes time. And it's not something that's going to happen right away. But I think once you start to build that resilience up, and that mental fortitude, you actually become a better person for it moving forward. So I would always remind people, like, we all have things that happen in our life that we look back on, and at the time it was such a really big deal, and it was completely overwhelming. But if we realize that eventually, as time passes, we eventually get through it, and it turns out it wasn't such a big deal after all. So kind of using that lens and that reference point moving forward, you can kind of, if you do come across hardships and difficult times, you can kind of use that as a point of reference to say, yeah, this sucks, this is horrible, but this is just a moment in time that will eventually pass, and I will get through it. So, what are your thoughts on that?
That's beautiful. I think it goes to the testament that emotions fluctuate. You are tied up in an emotion in a relationship, and if the relationship ends, you don't ever think that you'll get over it. Time will pass, and things will be experienced different for you because emotions fluctuate. Um, I think that's a beautiful point. It makes me think of, like, when I think of God and patience, like who really is, or the entity that is patient is God. God has an abundance of patience for me. And when I am on a journey and I'm going left, right, up and down and all around in circles and things like that, there's patience. Because at the end of the day, I believe God thinks, well, I don't want to say like God thinks, because that's, so
Yeah,
I believe in my relationship with God that it's an eternal relationship. It's the relationship that can never be destroyed. And there's patience and abundance there. Does that make sense?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It makes perfect sense.
Let me read a little bit in terms of continuing the reading um, in the book that talks about trust. So,
Okay.
trust is the first emotion to develop in infancy. Is my parent trustworthy? Will they know my different cries, feed me, change my diaper? Can they meet my needs? Trust is more than faith. Trust, trust represents being special enough for my parents or parent to meet my needs. When I will I be given what I need to face life challenges? It is about letting go of fear, paranoia, and suspiciousness, and at the same time, acknowledging one's vulnerability. Trust is built over a lifetime based on one's intuitive processes if we are reminded of our distortions. We all have many distortions. Trust is based on a deeper form of wisdom. Life is purposeful and meaningful. Trust is letting go of things, sometimes old things, sometimes old thinking patterns, sometimes relationships, sometimes ideas and perceptions about you and others. It means believing others can be helpful and accepting help while acknowledging your vulnerability. All people are not all good all the time, and they're not all bad all the time. Being aware of what is happening, you go through life with your eyes open, seeking to trust in yourself and others and in the world. So there was this idea of like trust in yourself. So how does one learn to trust in yourself, in themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a easy thing for everyone. Um, I think it is something that takes time, and you have to kind of develop and cultivate that skill. And then trusting yourself and others and in the world is something that, you know, it would require constant work, and you may have to put yourself in vulnerable positions at times. But I think ultimately, you know, there's so many things in our life that we trust kind of blindly, whether it be, you know, our cell phones, and
The
even,
food industry.
yeah, even if you look at, like, you know, the corporate world, there's so many antitrust lawsuits happening on a daily basis just because, you know, companies aren't doing what they say they're going to do, but as it pertains to like customer relationships and things like that, and data. So I think that at a very basic level, we need to learn to understand that we're not going to. The human body is conditioned not to put itself in a compromising situation. Like, so, like, if you feel yourself about to stumble, naturally your arms will come out to kind of catch you. And that's kind of like a survival mechanism because we want to maintain our livelihood, and that's just a base survival instinct. So when you look at it from that perspective, I think people are the same way. Like, I don't think people inherently want to put other people in harm's way, but it may be a result of a survival mechanism or just things like that. But ultimately, I believe most people deep down are good and they want to see other people survive and make it. But it just takes a little time and a little trust, and I believe it can be cultivated over a period of time.
So what I hear is that trust maybe fluctuates
Yeah, for
um,
sure.
depending on what the person may be going through, and also maybe what the external trusting factor is, whether or not it's an organization or whether or not it's an individual relationship, but that um, it might change. Um, so I would add, trust is first developed when we're born. And an infant learns to trust, and this is a part of attachment theory. An infant learns to trust their parent, mom, dad, foster parent, whoever the primary caregiver is, if that parent is good enough. That's it. It's based on the child's perception. Did my mom feed me? Does my dad know my different cries? Are my foster parents dependable? Um, are they going to give me positive sensations in the body, or am I having negative sensations in the body? So trust is kind of being built from like 0 to 5 during this infant and toddler stage with the adult who is supposed to be the healthy caregiver in their life. The challenge is when the child and the parent and this interaction between them is not good enough. It
Mm-hmm.
makes it very, very difficult to trust. And then that's why you see the different types of attachments that come up. But trust really is the foundation of most meaningful relationships, whether or not that's personal, professional, or in some societal ways. It involves the confidence in someone's integrity and their intentions. So, how confident do you feel that you were truly showing up? Or are you showing up in the world as like an actor and actress
Mm-hmm.
because you want to fit in or be accepted or go along with what has been told to you to be socially appropriate?
Mm-hmm.
So, building trust. I talk a little bit about this because this comes up a lot in terms of relationships in the clinical setting. And what I express is that trust is built over time. It can be destroyed and it can be rebuilt and it can be enhanced and it can be taken away. But when someone is dependable and consistent, then trust can be built on that. And at the same time, and I'll give an example. But let me just give the example now. So
Okay.
let's say you're in a relationship and the guy is struggling to trust the girl, and they just started dating, and she's very flashy. She may wear like some skimpy and pretty clothes, very appropriate for the current culture, pop culture, right?
Right.
And so he's bringing in all his old stuff from prior relationships, and now he is now established in this new relationships, but arguments are occurring because of the struggles he's having in terms of trusting her. um, what would be some of the things that he could do to build, for him to work on building trust? Because this isn't about her, this is him working to build trust.
Yeah. So that's a great question, by the way. Um, I think that men definitely, when it comes to men, first, one of the things we need to do when building trust is make ourselves more vulnerable, and I would say, first, learn to trust ourselves, and don't approach any relationship with being pretentious or being anything other than who you truly are. So I know a lot of times people, when you first meet them, you're kind of meeting their representative in a sense of it's not truly who they are to their core. But I believe the closer a person can get to who they are at their core and their core beliefs, core values, and who they are as a human being first, the closer you get to that, that really opens the doors for someone to trust you and to build trust, because I think trust is a two-way street. You have to give it to get it. So I believe the more trustworthy you are as a person, the more trustworthy you appear and you act, and someone can ask you a question and you're not having to think about the answer. You can just kind of speak from your spirit. Then over time, that trust will start to develop in the relationship, and you can actually expect that same thing from the other person. So it becomes a two-way street. But I believe it starts with the person opening up and being trustworthy first. Then that allows a person to be comfortable around you and open themselves up to being trusted by you.
Why that's important is to have that inner trust going into any relationship, um, because you can only be true to yourself. And what that
Yeah.
does in relationships is maybe you start asking some of those questions you wouldn't ask. Like, I'm just curious, every time we go out, it seems like you want to wear this type of attire. And I'm not saying not to wear this type of attire. I mean, you're an adult. I'm curious as to why. Because it may not be attractive to me. And if
Yeah.
you're wearing that because you think it's attractive to me, I just want it to be honest with you, type of thing. Or asking hard questions about relationships. So that vulnerability, for men is, so are we dating? Are we okay with having multiple dating partners? Like, what are we doing here in this relationship so that I can have clarity and there is no misunderstanding? And so I think some of those questions can be hard on an initial relationship as it's developing and forming to have, but it's going to save you a lot of headache. Then it becomes, this is where the trust in yourself becomes. Because then when she says, well, I'm not sure I want to be in a committed relationship, then you hear that. You don't try to convince her of something different. You don't try to say, well, I'll wait a couple of years and be miserable until she figures out that I'm this great guy. You listen to what she says and you say, okay. And you trust in yourself on whether or not you want to sit or be in a relationship or not. And I would say the same thing for a female, that you would ask your partner, like, are we just dating? Are we in a relationship? Are you just seeing me on the side? Like, what is the real thing? And then when he says, well, we're getting to know each other and I like you a lot, then you ask yourself, is that good enough? Is that what you want? Do you want to be likable at the time of the relationship? Or are you looking for something different?
Right.
And not try to change the other person, but try to trust in yourself to make a decision about what is going to be a healthy relationship for you
Right.
versus trying to make it fit. Because a lot of times we try to make relationships fit and we go years and years and years in trying to do that. And then people get build up resentment. They build up
Mm.
anger because they felt like they've changed all their lives. They've lost all kinds of things. And in actuality, if you ask those hard questions, you'll know at the beginning, and then you get to make a choice. And maybe
Right.
it's getting past the stuff on the outside, because that's kind of what draws us in, at least initially. But if you want a meaningful relationship, then maybe you figure out what that would be like for you. If you don't want a meaningful relationship, then maybe connecting with someone who is also on the same level as you. And so, like, there's
Absolutely.
this idea of like the we often will repeat, in terms of attachment there, we often will repeat patterns. So some people, like in the movies, it's always when you see someone goes to a therapist, and I always reference The Sopranos because Tony was always going to the therapist, and then at one scene he's like, "Oh my God, is it always about my mom? Like, can it be something else? Like, why does everything have to go back to their parents?" Well, I've studied Freud for many years, and some of the things that Freud stated, I felt has some truth to it. Like, it's never all wrong or all good all the time. There's some truth to what he was communicating in terms of that. And we are repeating patterns. So, as a baby, like as a male son, all you know is what if your first love is your mom, your second love is your dad. And you repeat those patterns because you're trying to work through something. And that's how life is. It's not a judgment about this is bad or good. It's a judgment about how life is. As you grow older and you start negotiating other relationships and you start experiencing pain, then you ask yourself, do I want to keep repeating this pattern? I don't know how healthy it is to be in a domestic violent relationship. Or do I want to stay here because maybe there's safety and security, but maybe accepting it in a different way, like knowing what it is based on where you're at in the relationship.
Mm. Yeah,
Any
absolutely.
thoughts about that?
No, that was a great point you just made there. 100%. I think that when you look at it from that perspective, it kind of provides a rationale to how we deal with relationships in our adult life. It usually does stem from, childhood and our relationship with our parents. So, and if I think if we're not conscious of that, then we may miss key aspects of why we do things that we do. So I think it's great to kind of bring that to the forefront because it allows people to at least start thinking differently about their current relationships and why they may be putting up with things they shouldn't be, or why, the situation is maybe the way it is. So I think that's a great way to look at things for sure.
So let me continue reading because this talks a little bit about my journey.
All
And I'm
right.
going to do it this time with my glasses because I couldn't read and
All right.
everything was getting a little blurry. As a child, I was protected. My mother is Caucasian and my father was African American. I have a brother who was older and protective, and my closest and safest peer relationship. My mother encouraged and affirmed me, establishing me to trust others. She would tell me that I was smart. It was more important than being pretty. As a single parent working multiple jobs, she still took time to do fun stuff, like reading to me and taking me to the zoo. I experienced the quality of this relationship, not the quantity, which was the amount of time spent together. Though it wasn't as accepted to have mixed children when I was young, she made sure to celebrate our blackness. For example, she made sure that my hair was combed in the 1970s and 1980s styles to fit in with peers. Leaving a legacy, she wanted us both, my brother and me, to have a sense of being loved and secure. So my trust was established. My primary caregiver was my mom. She was my first love. And she helped establish that sense of safety and that ability to trust because, for the most part, I experienced her as good enough. She was
Mm.
dependable. She met my basic needs. So she was good enough. My dad, who was my secondary um, caregiver to some extent, probably in some other people my mom had dated during that time, because my dad was in and out of my life, helped establish some other things for me in terms of attachments in relationships. And so, with that, because I had that foundation coming as an adult, going into relationships and trusting, that was my path. I don't want to say anything is better or easier or worse, because if you're born to a parent who is unavailable emotionally, and you feel like your attachment is anxiously, like you're anxiously attached, or you're disorganized in your attachment, or maybe fearful in your attachment, so there's a lot more resistance there. You can work through that. One, it's acknowledging what your attachment styles. This is never about playing. and how you experienced your primary caregivers, and then now putting people in your life that you can work towards a secure attachment, because that's the ideal
Mm,
place we want to be. We want to be in a secure attached place with ourselves, so that when we're in relationships with others, we can ask those hard questions and it doesn't make us dysregulated and it doesn't end up in fights and arguments and things like that.
mm, absolutely. And I think your story is very relatable for a lot of people. And I want to thank you for sharing your story, because if people don't have stories like these to relate to and kind of connect to their own personal life, it may be harder for them to make that transition to more of a mental wellness state of mind. So I want to thank you for that. And we're going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. Is there anything you wanted to leave with before we conclude?
I would like to leave with, next week we're going to talk about compassion, humility and compassion, which are really essential components when we think about spirituality. So just get excited and tune in for next week. Mhm.
Absolutely looking forward to it. So if you guys haven't already, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future episodes of the Trauma and Social Work podcast. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you guys so much. And until next time, bye bye.
We hope that you have found today's episode insightful and helpful on your wellness journey. If you have enjoyed the episode, please share with others. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review. It lets us know that all the work that we're doing is meaningful to you, and we'll continue to share simple techniques to help you move towards wellness, happiness, and success. Remember, this podcast is part of a bigger plan, building towards affordable group sessions and annual retreats, and we'd love to have you join us as we grow this movement. I will leave you with this thought. The body wants to heal. Get the mind out of the way. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. The rhythm of healing, the octaves method. O is for observation, through stillness we find meditation and breath work that quiet the mind. In silence we listen, the answers are clear, awareness emerges, dissolving the fear. C is for compassion, for self and for all, embracing the good, the struggles, the fall. With kindness we grow, we nurture, we mend, learning to love ourselves as we extend. T is for therapy, a path we explore. Daily we practice unlocking the door. From journaling to mindfulness, healing begins. Each step is a victory as peace settles in. A is for animals and laughter so bright, like children at play, their joy taking flight. With playfulness and movement, we rediscover the way to heal through the fun that we often delay. V is for victuals, nourishing and pure, detoxifying the body and keeping us sure. We choose what we eat with intention and grace, fueling our journey at our own pace. E is for exercise, where movement is free. We stretch and we bend in sweet harmony. Flexibility grows with choices we make, in strength and in stillness our bodies awake. S is for socialize, where self-growth begins. Others reflect our triggers and the places within. Through relationships, our true selves we find, growing and healing with each tie that binds. The octaves method, where all behavior makes sense. We just need to find the sense it presents. We just need to find the sense it presents. We just need to find the sense it presents.